guys, welcome back to the Two Mom Life podcast. Today's interview is like taking me back to my baby days. Now my youngest is, she is 3. And it's just such a, every age is so precious and so special, but I'm really, really excited to talk with Avie today she's a postpartum doula. So she's going to tell us more about that and what that means. And as I was prepping for this interview, I was just like leaning in to that time when I had little babies in my arms and when I could snuggle them and hold them and skin to skin and such a beautiful time. So before I gush too much, Avie, can you go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Avie Herman. I live in Toronto with my husband and my little girls who are 2.5 and 4.5, so sort of just past the baby stage. And I am a postpartum doula, as you said. I'm also an infant feeding specialist, so I focus on both breastfeeding and bottle feeding, with a focus on doing what's best for each individual family. And then I'm also a baby wearing educator, so I teach people how to use a variety of baby carriers, how to choose the right one for them. As you can see, I love working in the baby period, and a lot of people assume that you must really love babies. And while there is nothing better than snuggling a little newborn, what I really love and why I really do this work is supporting mothers and kind of being along the journey so that, parents can feel calm and confident as they go through this, special, but also sometimes trying time.
That's awesome. And that's what we're all about here on the Two Mom Life podcast. So this is just so perfect, all about supporting mothers, because it is. I always say motherhood is messy. There is nothing like regular and straight and narrow about it. It's very messy and it's great and beautiful. And also, as you said, very trying at times. So this is great. So tell us, okay, you're a postpartum doula. What does it mean to be a postpartum doula? What even is that?
Sure. So a lot of people have never heard of a postpartum doula. And people who have heard of it sort of assume that I go to people's houses and wash their dishes so they can take a nap, or, help with household tasks, or spend a lot of time, caring for baby. And while those are sort of all part of what I do in a typical shift, I really view my role as there to help support the entire family as they transition into parenthood, and to really support the parents. And so sometimes that looks like holding the baby so that mom can nap, or loading the dishwasher so it's one less thing to stress about. But so first of all, everything's sort of with the intention of making life a little calmer for mom. But a lot of it is sort of similar to what a labor doula does, in that I'm there to sort of walk alongside parents during, the early weeks, months of parenthood, and, hold space for all the feelings they may be having, offer education if there's, anything they're not sure about with taking care of a newborn, help with feeding, no matter how they're choosing to feed, and really just offer that compassionate, non-judgmental support. I always say, everyone has an opinion on what you do when you're pregnant and have a newborn. And I really view a big part of the doula's role is to sort of be the one person in your life who is knowledgeable and an expert in this area, but who doesn't actually have an opinion on what you're doing, and who will just follow your lead and do it how you want.
Wow, cool. So first, tell us what brought you into this field. Anyway, how did you get
I've always, loved babies and pregnancy and motherhood. And I've just been, since I was a single girl, I've always just found it really fascinating. And I actually started off when my firstborn was I don't know, like 2 years old. I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I took a training to become a baby wearing educator because I had fallen in love with baby wearing when I was pregnant, when I had my first daughter. She was very clingy and just wanted to be held all the time. And so I got really into baby wearing. And I wanted to share that with others. So I took this training to become a baby wearing educator. And after doing that for maybe a year, I realized that I didn't want to be limited in my scope of, the support that I could offer parents. I didn't want to just come in for an hour, help them learn how to use a baby carrier, and then disappear. I really wanted to sort of like walk alongside parents on their journey, and have that bigger role in that wider scope. And so being able to, go into people's homes, not right now, it's, kind of weird with COVID, but usually in general, being able to go into people's homes, and just sort of be there with them, talk. I spend so many of my shifts, maybe while I'm folding laundry, maybe while we have a coffee together, just talking. And, being a companion. Early motherhood can be so lonely. And so just, offering a listening ear without offering help or solutions necessarily, because so much of, what people need in general is just to be heard and understood. And so if that's all I do in a shift, I count that as a success. And I think that, the families I leave, and they just, you can tell they're a little bit more relaxed than they were when I arrived.
So how long do you work with a family for?
So some doulas I know will sort of limit it to the first 12 weeks or whatever. The training organization that I trained with, Pro Doula, sort of instilled in me that it's not really up to me to decide when postpartum ends for a family or when my support is no longer needed. And so I'm willing to work with a client for as long as they are wanting to have me. My very first client, her baby was 13 months old when I started. Yeah, she had some anxiety. She didn't trust anyone to take care of her baby. She needed time to get work done. And so she just really wanted, someone to help watch her kid who she could trust, and who she felt comfortable having in her home. But a lot of what I did over the shifts, yes, I watched her daughter so that she could get work done, but we spent just hours and hours sitting in the kitchen, having coffee together, feeding her daughter, solids, and just chatting, about her birth, about her adjustment to motherhood, what she was going through now, what she was struggling with. And I could tell it was just a relief to be able to, share that with, another person who really just understood.
Fascinating. So hiring a postpartum doula, from what you're saying, doesn't have to happen as the baby's born. It's something that, like this client, she hired you when her child was already 13 months old. So this, so tell us more about that. When do parents, or when should parents typically start thinking about the possibility of having a postpartum doula and hiring them? And also, when would you say it's most helpful for families?
So I think a lot of families start thinking about it during pregnancy, and I think pregnancy is a really great time to hire a postpartum doula. A lot of the clients, I work as part of an agency, so they sort of deal with getting the clients and that, and I just kind of show up and do the work. But a lot of the clients at the agency that I work for will hire a doula while they're pregnant, and then sort of set a tentative schedule, or select a certain amount of hours, and then once baby comes, then it comes into play. And that's what I did with my first. I didn't have a postpartum doula because I hired a birth doula, and I thought, if I need a postpartum doula, we'll deal with it then.
And just for our listeners, can you clarify this term doula? There might be some listeners out there who don't know what a birth doula is either.
Yeah. So basically, a doula provides educational, emotional, and physical support. A birth doula does that in the context of pregnancy and birth. They'll, often be available to you from the moment you hire them during your pregnancy to talk on the phone or send text messages, and answer your questions, and just, offer that emotional support. And then they'll come to your birth with you and help you through the experience of labor and delivery. And just from an emotional end, they don't do anything medical. Doulas are not medical care providers. We're not midwives. If you have a doula who's offering to check your cervix or take your blood pressure or anything like that, they probably shouldn't be. Unless they have other qualifications and they're wearing a different hat, doulas do not have the training to be doing any medical tasks. And so a birth doula is there throughout pregnancy and the birth itself. And then a postpartum doula is there for after the baby's born. And oftentimes doulas will have both of these trainings, but they're two separate certifications. And so not everyone who's a postpartum doula is also a birth doula. Not everyone who's a birth doula is a postpartum doula. And in my opinion, you're not gonna just, I have this birth doula who I love, but she's not a certified postpartum doula, but I'll hire her as a postpartum doula anyways. You could do that, but I personally think, wouldn't you rather someone who this is their area of expertise? Because while they're the same in a lot of ways, they are sort of distinct roles. So with my first, I had birth doulas who I loved, and I figured, I'll hire them for postpartum support after the baby's born. But then while I was sort of like in that, newborn haze, it was hard to sort of, justify the expense and do I really need it and and it just never ended up happening. And so with my second, I knew I was going to want that support. And so I signed a contract with them, selected, a package of hours, and you can either pay all at once or work out a payment plan. But I dealt with all that when I was pregnant, so that as soon as the baby was born, it was already set up. I didn't feel bad, like, do I really need it? Do I not really need it? Because it was already, it wasn't scheduled, but it was already sort of paid for, dealt with, it was happening. So I might as well take advantage of it. So personally, I feel that, the best time to think about this, just like you plan for your birth and, you think about what you'd prefer for how your birth is going to go. I think it's super important to plan for postpartum, and, think about what your preferences are, and just really consider, what life is going to look like. And part of that can involve hiring a postpartum doula. So definitely, and then you can also calmly choose someone, think it through. You can have a consult with them, either in person or now on Zoom, to sort of see if your personalities match. It's sort of a calmer process. But we certainly have, at the agency I work at, people, calling in a panic, oh my gosh, I haven't slept in a week, I need someone to come today. And depending on the size of the agency, there are doulas who work on their own, like it's their own small business. And then there's also agencies where they have multiple doulas working for them. So larger agencies probably can accommodate a same day or next day request, probably. And that's definitely not unreasonable to do, but it's definitely easier to sort of plan ahead, I think.
What's the typical amount of time? Do families often say, okay, I want someone every day for the first 2 weeks after birth? Or
yeah. So usually usually it's done in sort of a package of 50 hours, and then you break that into however many shifts you want, or 100 hours or 200 hours. And then based on how many, it's priced per hour. So you decide how many hours you want, and then you figure out how you're going to configure it. And depending on who you're working with, you might be able to have some flexibility in terms of scheduling after the birth. Okay. And you can also, there's day shifts, which it's common that the minimum amount of time for a day shift will be 4 hours. And then there are night shifts. And I think the minimum number hours for a night shift is 10 to 12 hours. And so you can have a postpartum doula there during the day doing what I just explained. And that's sort of what comes to mind for me, because I have young kids, I only work during the day. But then for a night shift, it's a little different. The goal of most postpartum doulas is to, maximize sleep for everyone, and they'll do a couple little things, like they might wash some bottles, whatever. But it's not like you're sleeping and the baby's sleeping, so they're up doing your laundry all night. Usually they'll sleep when the baby sleeps, and the goal is just to keep the house as quiet and calm and normal as possible. And part of the idea behind that is like they're not up all night watching your baby sleep, because they don't want to set an expectation that you, when they're not there, need to be up all night watching your baby sleep. At night everyone should be sleeping, but they're there to, if you're bottle feeding, they take all the night feeds. If you're breastfeeding, the baby usually they'll sleep with the baby in a separate room. And so when the baby wakes up, they pick the baby up. If they want to eat, they'll come bring the baby to you. They'll help you with the feed. And then once the baby's done, you go back to sleep, and they take the baby and, rock it, burp it, change the diaper, get it back to sleep, which with newborns, that can take quite some time. So this way you're not dealing with all the extra stuff. You can just nurse and go back to sleep.
And if you are bottle feeding, they could potentially take care of all the night feeds so that you get all night sleep.
Yeah, and I mean, if the client, for whatever reason, wants to be woken to give the baby the bottle, then absolutely the doula will do that. But sort of one of the benefits of bottle feeding is that the doula can take all the night feeds, and you can, and if it's pumped breast milk in the bottles, then maybe you'll have to wake up a couple times to pump, so they can help you with that. But if you're just formula feeding, that you can get a full uninterrupted night's sleep. Which can be really beneficial.
So interesting. So do you know what's the difference between, say, like a postpartum doula at working a night shift and a night nurse?
So the difference between that, and then also between a postpartum doula and a baby nurse in general, is that a baby nurse or a night nurse is really just focused on the baby, and their training is, they're trained, in taking care of newborns, but they don't have that sort of parental support piece. They're supporting you by letting you sleep, but they're really just there for the baby. Whether it's, a night nurse or like a baby nurse or a newborn nanny, whereas the postpartum doula training that I did, I'm actually like a postpartum doula and infant care specialist or something like that. So it includes infant care sort of in my area of expertise, but a postpartum doula would be there to support the entire family. So like I can competently, feed and change your baby, give them a bath, anything that they need. But they're not my only priority. I can also, if you're nursing, help with breastfeeding, whereas a night nurse may have the capacity to help with breastfeeding, may not, have that expertise. So I think of, postpartum doulas as just a little bit more holistic, as in treating the whole situation, not as in like crunchy natural, but as in, taking care of everything, like has a little wider scope. Whereas just a baby nanny or a night nurse is a little bit more limited. And I wanted to I didn't fully answer your previous question. So in terms of, the frequency of shifts, so someone might want, every day for the first 2 weeks for a couple hours a day, or they may want, nothing during the day and just, every night for a few weeks. Or you could have, 3 nights a week for the first, 6 weeks, or 3 days a week for the first 6 weeks, or some combination. So there's a lot of flexibility, and it's really just completely customized to what the family needs. So
yeah, so cool. That's so cool. Now, when I was thinking of postpartum doula, my mind automatically goes to like, okay, crunchy granola type of mom living in Portland, Oregon, like me, versus like, Jewish mom living in the heart of Brooklyn, New York. So can you talk a little bit into that? Who is a postpartum doula for? My sense is that it's really for everyone, but are postpartum doulas around in more urban cities?
So it's actually interesting. I have sort of found in my own experience and heard from a lot of other postpartum doulas like across, the country, For birth doula support, while birth doulas are for everyone, there's sort of a leaning towards, if I'm, having an unmedicated birth, so I'm going to get a doula. We could talk about why that's not true in another time. But in terms of postpartum doula support, I actually find, and from what I understand, generally, it's more professionals, mainstream professionals who, may be living away from family. They're used to, outsourcing a lot of help. They need a little bit more support, and they have the financial means because it's not inexpensive to have. And so it's a lot of professionals having babies later in life, who sort of, want that little bit of extra care and support. So I don't find that it's necessarily seen as, as crunchy as, a birth doula has a reputation for being kind of really crunchy. I don't feel that postpartum doula support has that same sort of connotation or the same clientele. I know there are doula agencies where even within the agency, they have different demographics hiring birth doulas and hiring postpartum doulas.
Very interesting.
But again, like you said, it's totally I was the frum Jewish mother living in Toronto, young, fresh out of college, and I hired a postpartum doula. So yeah, definitely for everybody, but it's not necessarily a crunchy thing.
Yeah, no, totally. And I just want to go back to this, when you think about life as a mom, and especially so many of us have multiple children, and life as a mom with a lot on your plate, and in many cases a career and multiple kids. And then you've got to think about your health and your well-being and your mental health and your mental capacity and your physical health and your physical capacity, and the possibility of how much a postpartum doula can help, if it's right for you, the amount that they can really help set you at ease and help maximize what you can take in for yourself in terms of your physical health, your mental health, can be really, huge.
For sure. When I had hired a postpartum doula, I referred to her as my postpartum fairy godmother. I felt like she walked in and I instantly sort of let out a sigh and felt so much calmer immediately. And there wasn't anything magical she did, but just being a calm presence, an extra set of hands, an ear to listen. We chatted while we organized my kids' clothes, which is always a really overwhelming task for me. And I held the baby while she folded, and we just talked. And it's just, it's a weight off.
I never had a postpartum doula, but it is something that I've been thinking about. Should there ever, I have no idea, but were I ever to do it again, I think it would be something I would very, very seriously consider. Very seriously. Cool. So before we wrap up, tell me, I have a couple quick questions for you, but what are some of the biggest challenges that your clients face and that you help them with? Just one or two big ones.
I think just that feeling of isolation, overwhelm, the intensity of transitioning to motherhood. It's not something that's talked enough about. And so I think it can feel kind of consuming, and just being able to talk about some of the changes you're going through, again, helps lighten that load.
And what about one last piece of advice that you have for our listeners? Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our moms listening in today?
I think really just prioritize yourself and your needs, and take care of yourself and accept help. I feel in the early days, it's so easy to feel like you're not doing enough, and you're constantly doing these mundane little tasks for the baby, and you'd rather be getting things done. And I know how it feels. I've been there myself. And I think just offering yourself grace, and understanding, that, the newborn period is really intense for most people, and that it's just sort of a stage that will pass, can be helpful.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a great time talking to you. This is very enlightening and interesting. And guys, I hope those of you that are listening in are just, having something else to think about. And if you know of anyone who is pregnant, who might benefit from a postpartum doula, you can direct them to this episode. No unsolicited advice. I'm not encouraging that necessarily, but just I think the more people that hear about the resources that are out there, the better, because you never know what resonates with one person, and it might not be your thing, but it might be your friend's thing or your cousin's thing, or and I just love that there is so much out there that we can explore and that we can take advantage of. And something that I love about doing this podcast is that sometimes I get to facilitate that right fit. And that is just amazing. And we can all do it in our own little ways. So Avie, thank you so much for your great work. Thank you so much for your time. Guys, I don't take your time lightly. Thanks for tuning in and spending your time with us today. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun. And if you want to download my free baby wearing safety checklist, you can head over to my Instagram and click the link in bio and get that in your inbox.
That is beautiful. That is so great. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners today.
All right, take care. So nice speaking.